Here is the Catechism of the Catholic Church, Universal Catholic Catechism. Nice to have something like this. It's pretty big, pretty involved. This one was published and printed in 1993. Okay, so that was 30 years ago. If we're talking about an unchanging church, it shouldn't matter that this was published 30 years ago, right? And yet, there have been changes. Let me mention the words of the Catechism of the Council of Trent. Now, again, Council of Trent, Counter-Reformation Council. You probably have a much higher level when you have documents produced out of controversy. They have a much higher level of specificity because they're having to address specific issues. So the documents that come out before the Reformation in light of interactions with Eastern Orthodoxy are going to have more specificity and clarity on the issues that separate East and West at that time than existed before. Then you get to the Council of Trent, and now you have the Reformation. And so the Tridentine documents, which give us primarily Thomas Aquinas's theology, soteriology, sacramentology, they are given to us in the canons and decrees of the Council of Trent, which likewise I do not have in here at the moment. And those then became the basis for the 1566, that's 20 years after the beginning of the Council of Trent, 1546. So 1566, they publish a catechism, Catechism of the Council of Trent. Let me quote from the Catechism of the Council of Trent. The just use of this power, speaking of the death penalty, the just use of this power, far from involving the crime of murder, is an act of paramount obedience to this commandment which prohibits murder. So the Council of Trent, and before this, you could create an absolutely airtight argument that the magisterium of the Roman Catholic Church had taught that it is appropriate to execute people for certain heinous crimes, that the death penalty is just and appropriate, and in fact, it says here, is an act of paramount obedience to this commandment which prohibits murder. So it's talking about the Ten Commandments. It's talking about the commandment not to take life. And I agree with the Council of Trent that a society that will not kill predators, but instead steals from the rest of us to provide them with food and shelter and medical care for the rest of their lives. Because that's what, if you don't have the death penalty, then that's what you're doing. You're going to put somebody away, and you're going to feed them and clothe them and shelter them, and at least in the olden days give basic medical attention. Now, if you're in California, or if we're talking about federal prisoners, they can ask for gender assignment surgery, and you'll pay for that. Pretty amazing, isn't it? That is not a society that is protecting life. That's not a society. People say if you're pro-life, if you're against the murder of a child in the womb, then you should not be for the death penalty. That's an incredibly shallow position to take. The same God who said you shall not murder likewise said that if someone does murder, then their life is to be taken by the community, by, we would call it the state today, but by the community, because this is a person. The taking of innocent life, the issue is innocent life. The taking of innocent life is a fundamental violation of biblical norms, of norms that go all the way back to Cain and Abel. And while a repentant murderer can find forgiveness, they still need to be executed in a just society. But we don't have a just society any longer because we don't believe that men are created in the image of God any longer, and therefore there's no foundation for having justice. It all becomes whatever a particular people group decide at a particular time. Anyway, so to be pro-life is to protect life in the womb and afterwards. And so if someone commits murder, I mean, I can't get out of my mind. I haven't looked for it. I've thought about doing it. But I've mentioned to you once before the video clip I saw on Twitter from Chicago of one individual. These people spill out of what's clearly a bar late at night, probably gang stuff. And there's one individual, goes to his vehicle, gets a semi-automatic pistol, and in cold blood, without the slightest evidence of remorse, thinking he's the coolest thing on the planet, he killed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people from one camera angle, mercilessly. Shoot them down, then walk up and shoot them right between the eyes. Execution style. And then walks back to the vehicle and gets in with his buddies. That individual must be tried swiftly and executed swiftly. Not 20 years down the road. Not 30 years down the road. 2 months down the road. No more. If justice is going to be done. Or just expect the body count to just... How many in Chicago last week? I don't know. There's a whole website that keeps track of it. A couple weeks ago, it was 60-something, 60, 70-something in one weekend. And nobody cares. Nobody says a word about it. If the people on the left had any humanity even left to them, they would be screaming about it. They don't care. That doesn't fit the narrative, so it doesn't matter. You see someone like that, and the just thing, the loving life thing, is to take that person's life. Because if they're willing to do that, they will do it again given the opportunity. It might be the guard in the jail. And with the bleeding heart leftist liberals out there, they might let that person out again. And they'll do it again. And the taking of those innocent lives, that is the great tragedy, biblically speaking. So, the Council of the Catechism of the Council of Trent was right. The just use of this power, far from involving the crime of murder, is an act of paramount obedience to this commandment which prohibits murder. That was the infallible teaching of the Roman Catholic Church in 1566. It isn't anymore. And here's the evidence. 1993, James Kirk needs his glasses. 1993. Preserving, this is 2266. The new number in the current catechism is 2267. So there's been some changing of the numeration stuff. Preserving the common good of society requires rendering the aggressor unable to inflict harm. For this reason, the traditional teaching of the Church has acknowledged as well-founded the right and duty of legitimate public authority to punish malefactors by means of penalties commensurate with the gravity of the crime, not excluding, in the cases of extreme gravity, the death penalty. For analogous reasons, those holding authority have the right to repel by armed force aggressors against the community in their charge. The primary effect of punishment is to redress the disorder caused by the offense. When his punishment is voluntarily accepted by the offender, it takes on the value of expiation. Moreover, punishment has the effect of preserving public order and the safety of persons. Finally, punishment has a medicinal value. As far as possible, it should contribute to the correction of the offender. That's the penitentiary concept there. Capital punishment. Within the teaching of the church, this is it's saying consistent traditional teaching of the church. The state has that right. 2018, Francis says nope. Francis says nope. And he changed, as I said, what is now 2267. So the new version of 2267, recourse to the death penalty on the part of legitimate authority following a fair trial was long considered an appropriate response to the gravity of certain crimes and an acceptable, albeit extreme, means of safeguarding the common good. Today, however, there is an increasing awareness that the dignity of the person is not lost even after the commission of very serious crimes. In addition, a new understanding has emerged of the significance of penal sanctions imposed by the state. Lastly, more effective systems of detention have been developed, which ensure the due protection of citizens, but at the same time do not definitively deprive the guilty of the possibility of redemption. Consequently, the church teaches, in the light of the gospel, that the death penalty is inadmissible because it is an attack on the inviolability and dignity of the person. And she works with determination for its abolition worldwide. End quote. Okay. Now, you can stand on your head, you can spin in circles, you can drink all the Bud Light you can find, because there's plenty of it around these days, because nobody else is drinking it, and make yourself just completely sauced. You can't put those two things together. You cannot get around the fact that the Pope changed what the church taught was her consistent tradition all along. If the Pope's right now, this is wrong. If the Pope's right now, the Council of Trent was wrong. And I know what you have to do. Well, catechisms aren't dogmatic, and this statement isn't. You have to start doing what lawyers do to try to get around the fact that your client has contradicted himself. I remember clearly, and I've talked about this more than once, I remember clearly when we first started engaging with Roman Catholics, Catholic Answers specifically, the big attraction in a changing world, and things weren't changing nearly as fast back then as they are now, but in a changing world, we have stability. We have sameness. We have an infallible source of authority. And all you've got is the Bible, and so sola scriptura is the blueprint for anarchy, and blah, 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 blah. And now you've got Francis. And all of you honest Roman Catholics know, you know that your current epistemological nightmare may not end with Francis. Remember just a few months ago, he's putting people with a pro-choice background on papal commissions. Remember that? Scandalous. Absolutely scandalous. Who am I to judge homosexuality, right? And you're all of a sudden going, man, with the Catholic bishops, or the German bishops in schism, we need leadership right now. Sort of like people in the United States going, Tony Blinken's about to go to China. He is going to be made a fool of there. Well, he's pretty foolish as it is, and that's why. But he's going to be made a fool of there. And we're like, man, we could really use real leadership right now. And we don't have any anywhere. Nobody in this regime has any leadership capacity at all. Well, look at the situation Rome's in. The German bishops are in schism. And what's Francis doing? You know you don't have any in your honest, you may not say this to other people, but in your heart, you know you do not have any trust in this man as a leader. You don't. If you're just being honest with yourself. And here is a clear example. Here is the church in 1566. Here's the church in 1993. Here's the church in 2023. Saying different things. Not just different things, not just a slightly changed thing, but absolutely in utter contradiction. The Pope here is calling for the church to work with determination for the abolition of capital punishment worldwide. And that same allegedly infallible church, at the very time of exercising that charism of infallibility in the Counter-Reformation and anathematizing Protestant teaching, says, nope, this is actually vitally important to the preservation of life and the respect of life. They were right back then. Wrong now, right back then. So here's the issue. The Pope writes to the homosexual promoting Jesuits and says, way to go, guys, praying for you. Hope you have a great conference. And what we're being told is, well, there's it's not an official statement, and he doesn't say, I define and defend, and do. I remember a pope named Honorius wrote a letter to Sergius, another bishop in the East. And what he said in that letter on a theological issue led to his being identified as a heretic and anathematized by every person who took his position as Bishop of Rome for 400 years. By name, they had to anathematize him. Why doesn't this letter represent what the Pope actually believes? Well, hey, as long as he doesn't define it, is that really all you've got? Is that really all you've got? Well, as long as he doesn't.